Elves have an extraordinarily long lifespan, even by fantasy standards. They live not only for centuries, but indeed for millennia. The period between the Roman Empire and our own modern time probably fits in the lifespan of just a single elf, if they even have a maximum lifespan at all. And before I forget it, this video has a full-length companion video about Friren's long life and how it also makes her very dangerous, and it's linked down in the video description, so please go check it out. Now, the problem with the long life that elves enjoy is that more often than not, it does not really affect them or alter their perspective on time, on human relationships, and even how they spend their life, what kinds of plans, goals and dreams they have at all. And more oftentimes than not, they have nearly always the same personality as everybody else in their adventurer group, at court, or wherever else they show themselves. And again, I personally don't think that elves live too long. In contrast, I like the idea of having a really long-lived species because it can be used to illustrate vastly different perspectives. But it is sadly seldomly used for conflict and storytelling potential. For example, an elf kingdom might act completely indifferent to the sacking, looting and pillaging and burning of an entire human kingdom by an invading orc army, not because they have no personal empathy for the people who have settled there, not because they hate humans or anything, or not because they are haughty, entitled little prigs that only care about themselves, but because this is the 7th time in living memory, at least for the elves, that elves have watched ignorant humans who had been warned time and time again that this specific piece of land can't be held in the case of an orc invasion, since it lacks any large natural barriers, such as mountains, lakes, and major rivers that cross the entire nation. The humans, in their ignorance, ignored not only the warning of the elves, but also the very writing of their great-grandparents to not settle in this funnel for any orc invasion. So of course the elves don't want to waste their valuable and hard-to-replace elf warriors and mages, for again, an elven life would last for millennia, so they would be very reluctant to ever commit a great part of their army for a single Pyrrhic victory or defeat. So of course the elves don't want to waste their valuable and hard-to-replace manpower, for again, an elf would live for millennia, so they would be very reluctant to ever commit a great part of their forces for a single Pyrrhic victory, because defeat could simply render them military impotent for the next millennia to come. And therefore they instead wait in pre-prepared positions in mighty fortresses that had been built up high into the mountains, amidst mighty streams, and in long depleted underground former mine shafts, so that when the time comes, the orc could advance until they reach the kill zone that the elves have built up and used time and time again for millennia, and so they would defeat yet another orc incursion and keep their losses to an absolute minimum. But of course, the humans just see a, from their perspective, unprecedented orc invasion, a green tide washing over them, something before only told in myths and legends, and therefore they are pretty disheartened and downright angry when the elves just sit on their thumbs and do nothing except smugly reminding everybody that they had just warned them. This of course could also lead to a failure of elfin perspective and political calculation, because the elves' inaction could be indeed seen as the cause for the invasion, since the orcs would know that the elves would do nothing. Other human nations therefore might see the elven inaction as part of a plot of the very elf nation to weaken the other nations because they are human. Because from the human perspective, time and time again, the elves were all too happy to let the men bear the brunt of the orc invasion, wait patiently until a new upstart nation that could and surely would have outgrown the elven power eventually be crushed underfoot the greenskin tide, only for the elves to finally lend their aid after their own lands are finally threatened. And even then, they will let humankind do the actual melee battle against the bigger and stronger orcs, while they themselves hide behind human soldiers and fire their spells from a good and safe distance. And since human mages would be very keen on seeking more and more knowledge from the elves, perhaps those humans who still cozy up to the knife ears would also be seen as dangerous, and perhaps a human king, a council, or any ruling body of any other nation might want to fight against the elves to seize their land and resources, and for a change be themselves the ones that would hide behind high walls, mighty mountains, and incredible deep torrents and streams, instead of being butchered by the orc invaders time and time again. So just like humans, elves could fail to understand the perspective of other beings, and therefore a conflict between elvenkind and humankind could break out. A conflict nobody really wanted, but a conflict that has been caused by the difference in perception of time and perspective. And to give you a more down-to-earth example, let's say an elven mayor would do nothing with any budget surpluses than to plant trees that bear fruits only in 100 years from now. This might be seen as a prudent investment from the elven point of view, since due to the need to tend to the trees for a century, their fruits are scarce and would fetch a good price, ensuring that the great-grandchildren of the humans living in this village or city would adore the elf for making them all fairly wealthy. But this might just lead to humans feeling wronged, since all of their hard work will not lead to them getting any richer, and it will only be the elf that will be still around to reap the fruits that the humans have now to sow and tend to right now for many, many decades to come. So effects like these would be very interesting to actually have in any fantasy story, in fantasy games or movies. But this untapped potential is oftentimes squandered, and elves being long-lived is more or less just a random fun fact, and perhaps used for some jokes, like elves forgetting what century it is. Okay, so elves, at least from my perspective, do not live too long, but my problem is that their long lives are rarely used to give a different perspective. But again, this is just my opinion. What is yours? Let me know down in the comment section, and while you type, I say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.